Hello, and welcome to the Get French Football News Preview Show. I'm your host, Eric Devin, and joining me are Peter Bowler and Nathan Staples. Adam White is absent this week. After a breathless few weeks of domestic football, the Champions League and Europa League returned, bringing with it some decidedly mixed results for the five Ligue 1 teams. Tuesday saw both Monaco and Lyon in action. Monaco earned a draw at home against Bayer Leverkusen, Camille Glick equalizing with essentially the last kick of the match to cancel out Javier Hernandez's opener on 73 minutes. Monaco now topped the group on 4 points, with Tottenham Hotspur just behind them on 3. Lyon, however, were not so lucky, as their 1-0 loss at Sevilla was a flattering scoreline, despite hitting the woodwork twice. A solitary goal from Wissam Ben Yedder was the difference. The striker Luciano Vietto arguably should have had a hat-trick. And Lyon now sit in third behind Juventus and Sevilla, who are both on 4 points. Paris Saint-Germain were in action yesterday, and their 3-1 win over Ludogorets was similarly more than the routine result would suggest. The hosts opened the scoring on 15 minutes and did well to keep PSG at bay before Blaise Matuidi equalized in the stroke of halftime. Edinson Cavani followed that up with a second-half brace, and the result leaves them level with Arsenal, both on 4 points to top the group. In the Europa League, Nice remained without a point after falling 5-2 on Russian side Krasnodar, thanks to a brace and an assist from the diminutive Brazilian Jairzinho and a brace from his countryman Ari. The result sees the hosts stay level with Schalke, who also won on 6 points. Saint-Etienne, meanwhile, conceded a penalty which Anderlecht converted before, as has become their habit, converting a late equalizer to draw 1-1, which now sees them in second place in the group behind Mainz, who won 3-2 at Kabbalah. So we'll start this week's show with a brief look at the European matches, coming on to Sevilla and Lyon. Nathan, you wanted to ask me some questions about this?
Oh, absolutely. We don't have a better Lyon expert than the man himself, Eric Devin, do we? So it was an interesting game with a strong Sevilla side who've had a good start to the season, but it was really Steven Nzonzi you felt ran the game. How do you think he was so dominant in this one?
Well, I think that he was one of several players who I think really stood out for Sevilla. I think the others being the left back Escudero and Samir Nasri, believe it or not, had a really wonderful match in a free roll. But where this match was won and lost for me was in central midfield. And Lyon offered up a midfield of Darder, Gonalon, and Tolisso playing in the 3-5-2 system. But such is Nzonzi's pace and physical power that Lyon really lacked the ability to counter that. And this is where I would have liked to have seen perhaps Toussaint or Ferry come in for Darder. Darder did have some nice runs with the ball. He slipped in Fekir only to see him strike the woodwork, I believe. And he does offer that creativity going forward. But since Nzonzi was played on the right side of the central pairing of Sevilla's two, that was Darder's side. That is, he really lacked the ability to track back, and that allowed Nzonzi to basically run midfield by himself, which allowed Vasquez on into the attack as well. So Sevilla were really effectively able to get 7 men forward at times, with the two fullbacks Mariano and Escudero joining the attack as well. And I do feel if Lyon and Bruno Genesio had opted not a different formation, obviously the 3-5-2 seemed to have been working well enough. Jordi Gaspar's debut notwithstanding, to opt for a more physically robust midfield. I think that it's qualification's not over, but it's absolutely imperative that Lyon get at least a point from the two matches they have coming up against Juventus if they want to have a chance of qualifying.
Yeah, and that's what I wanted to briefly mention. Is failure they were lucky in a couple of chances where they hit the crossbar and the post. Is failure to get a point away from Sevilla possibly their end of progression, or is this a nice open enough group with the Sevilla and Juventus yet?
Well, historically, we've seen 8 or 9 points generally be enough for qualification. Were they to win the reverse against Sevilla and the reverse against Dinamo Zagreb, that would leave them on 9 points. But given that Zagreb are likely to lose all 6 of their matches, 9 points probably is not enough, and they do need to get at least a point against Juventus.
Yeah, and it's going to be a tough one with two really good teams in the group, but hopefully that result won't affect them too much. I'll hand the reins back to you, Eric, as we move on to Monaco's game against Bayer.
Yeah, a really interesting encounter here between the aggressive high press of Roger Schmidt's Bayer Leverkusen and Leonard Jardim's tactically sound AS Monaco. We saw Camille Glick sort of be the GOAT and the hero here. He badly left Chicharito unmarked for the opener, but also scored a rather brilliant winner in the last minute of injury time. But this is the second match in a row, Nathan, where Monaco have rung an unexpected result, the last being against Angers at the weekend. What do you think it is that's driving this team's competitiveness in their spirit right now?
Geek, almost single-handedly, it seems at times. I will give myself a minor pat on the back that in the preview I mentioned that Camille Glick and Javier Hernandez were the two danger men to watch out for, and they both scored the goals. But I also mentioned there that they needed to try and stop Leverkusen from getting in behind, because that's where Chicharito is most dangerous. They allowed that once through Glick himself, and they scored. And it was a good finish again from the Mexican international. And you can't give a player of that caliber that kind of chance, but give it to someone like Glick, who's got great leadership, great belief in his own ability, and really adds an edge to Monaco, even not just in his defensive work usually, although he fell asleep in this one for a brief moment, but his ability in the air and his ability to attack and be dangerous in the opposition box is a real strange addition that many people might not have predicted happening. He scored the goal against Angers, like you mentioned at the weekend. He scored he inadvertently allowed the defender to score the goal that eventually came as the winner. And then he scores that absolutely fantastic goal in the last moment where we didn't think it was coming, really, in all honesty. There's a great video of Marcel Desailly at the game, and he's commenting on it, and it goes in behind him. It's absolutely fantastic. It's something you should search out if you can find it. But that extra edge is something you need from a team that's going to be competing on two fronts and trying to be successful. I think Glick epitomizes that, and this is a really, really good point for Monaco, even though I did say the other week you need to win all your home games. A draw in this group that's very competitive is not a bad result either.
Yeah, especially with a pair of matches against CSKA Moscow coming up. They do look to be the whipping boys of this group, and we'll give best wishes to Monaco as they prepare for their next two matches against the Russian side. Coming on now to you, Peter, we're going to talk about PSG's trip to Ludogorets. A decent result in the end for PSG, but I think the question I really want to ask you, given how you've defended him in the recent past, is can Thiago Motta be given another chance at the base of midfield?
The simple answer to that, I think, is yes. I think in defense of Motta, there are kind of obvious reasons why he had such a poor game. I don't know about you guys, but to me, he looked like a player who knew he had been replaced and knew he wasn't the future. And that must be very, very difficult for any professional in any sport to know that they've gone from being a central point in the team, like he was under Laurent Blanc, to someone who is essentially just being shafted out of the team. He looks slower than usual, and his kind of intricate, quick thinking in his passing game, it didn't look right. But it didn't really surprise me because he's not a player who I think is in the right mindset. My thinking with the Ludogorets game would have been that if you look at that starting 11 and the formation, of course, the 4-3-3, it looked like a Laurent Blanc team, apart from obviously Areola. And I wondered if maybe Emre's thinking there is that Motta, with Verratti and Matuidi on either side of him in a familiar formation, might flourish and might be able to get back to his best. It didn't work. Can he be trusted at that point in the midfield again? Yes, I think so. He's still a very, very good player who's obviously had a poor game. But perhaps maybe he could be utilised more in the league rather than in the Champions League, seeing as it's such a priority for Paris Saint-Germain.
And I mean, the obvious elephant in the room here is Gregor Skrikowiak, who was brought in from Sevilla at no insignificant cost. I believe it was 25 million euro in the summer. What's going on here? Is this a case, again, we've talked about this in the past, a case of the club's hierarchy tying Unai Emery's hands behind his back, or does Emery genuinely believe that Motta's a better option given his experience in the Champions League?
I'm not sure. That's a difficult question to answer. I think he probably recognises that Motta is a senior figure, an important figure in the dressing room and in the team, and that's useful. That's a useful kind of player to have. I think Krakowiak. I don't know about anybody else, but when I've seen him play this season, he hasn't looked fit. So perhaps it's an issue of that, but. Seeing as they spent so much money on him, I would expect to see him as the season goes on feature more and more and more and become a very important player for them.
Nathan, do you want to add anything about Thiago Motta or the state of this game?
Thiago Motta.
Be careful now. Be careful now, Nathan. I'm listening.
He was jumping on a grenade, wasn't he? And for that penalty, that was why I didn't like that. That's the only reason I can think of it.
Like a hero, you mean? Like a heroic champion.
Yes. Yeah. For the opposition, possibly. Yes. He's not had a good time of it recently. He was pretty poor against Toulouse. He gives away the second goal essentially. I would start Krakowiak. I thought PSG were a little bit laboured in this one. I thought Di Maria was still pretty absent, and Cavani, although he scores 2 goals, a little lucky. I think the goalkeeper should do better on the header, because it is still not enormously far away from him. He's not gone that far past it. And the second's a deflection. He shirks that responsibility in the wall for the Ludogorets goal. They towed a line in this one, and I think that shows their form at the moment. Unai Emery should not be allowed a free pass for this one. I think that the pressure's on for them to get another result that weekend, really, and get back into the form that they should be playing at this time of the season.
That certainly won't be easy against the Bordeaux team that have been finding a bit of form themselves lately, especially defensively. Nathan, we'll continue on with you now in today's early match. That's Nice's defeat at Krasnodar. So a couple of questions I want to put to you. One is, Nice have looked relatively solid this season, but they were really undone, especially early in the match, by individual errors in defense. Is that something that Favre can work on, or is that simply down to the quality of player he has available to him?
I think that from comparing it what they've had already this season, it seemed a little bit like it was more of a blip than a worry. I don't think they've been incredibly bad defensively this season. In fact, they've had the best defense in Liga. It was just little mind blips. I think the problem that Favre has is not the players at his disposal. I think those 3 are decent. It's more giving them a rest for something like the Europa League is difficult because of the depth he doesn't have in that area. So whether they can carry on with a 3-5-2 and fight on 2 fronts, whether they can fight on 2 fronts now full stop is the real question. But there were too many little errors of judgment, little slips, and for their first half and then the second half, a lot of their goals came on the counter as Nice were pushing. So you can kind of forgive the defence slightly for being outnumbered for especially the 4th and the 5th. But yeah, little lapses in concentration, maybe due to tiredness. I think more than anything, it seemed that way anyway. They were very sort of mental errors, giving the ball away in silly areas, delaying passes a little bit too often. But yeah, it's something Favre needs to address in the sense of finding a better rotation for these players, but it's not something technical or ability-wise that he needs to fix in these players, I think.
And what about Valentin Acerich? I thought he was, he was a surprisingly impressive performer on the evening. Is he someone who should be given more of a chance as the season goes on?
Yeah, I thought he was pretty good as well. But I also think that when Lusamba came on, he made a difference as well. It was Cyprian, wasn't it, that came on and scored the second? Sorry. I thought he was good as well. So it's an interesting dilemma. I think it's a good thing that Acerich played well because they do need more options in and around Balotelli, who he pulled off at half-time, probably to rest him for the league game as well. But in all honesty, the Europa League probably looks a little bit beyond them now, even though they've got probably their easiest fixtures next 2 up. But they need to win both probably to realistically stand a chance. So it's a good option to have that Acerich played so well, and it gives the thought to Favre, and it gives him the option should Belander drop form or he decide that Acerich would work in a certain formation or a certain time, and it gives him more rotation options. But whether to give him more time on the pitch, I would always run with whoever's in form. And he played well. I'd give him the game at the weekend and see how he goes from there. And yeah, the only issue with it is this result is really kills their Europa League ambition for me. I can't see them coming back. They would need to beat. I'm trying to remember the fourth team in their group now. Who did Schalke play earlier?
Red Bull Salzburg.
That's it, yeah. And they're still a decent side, even though I think they lost this evening. But yeah, this is too much of a difficult task than that for them to overcome. So it is a shame, but on the night, Krasnodar were a better side and definitely deserve this win.
All right, Peter, I'll come on to you now in today's second match. That's Saint-Etienne versus Anderlecht. Just give us a brief recap of the match and whether you thought their result was deserved.
I did think it was deserved, yeah. I mean, I haven't got too much to say about the game, purely because I unfortunately only saw the second half. But from what I saw, Anderlecht were defensively very well organised. They lined up really, really well, and Saint-Etienne threw absolutely everything at them. And I think they deserved their equaliser in the end from Nolan Roux after a sort of defensive mishap. But I think there's positive signs there again. Saint-Etienne have to find better ways to win. If they're not going to go far in this competition if they can't figure out how to break down defensive lines like Anderlecht's. But I thought there was certainly enough from that performance for them to feel positive about going forward in the Europa League.
All right, I think that's generally the consensus. The Saint-Etienne are sort of bobbing along, and a good result, especially managing with the derby ahead of the weekend. And speaking of weekend matches, we are going to come now onto our Liga previews. Our standings now, someone's opened up a commanding lead. That's Nathan with 18 points. I'm in second myself with 10. Adams and Peter have 9. So it's sort of a decisive lead, but not one which can't be overcome. So we'll let our leader get us started with tomorrow's Breton derby. That's Guingamp traveling to Rennes. Rennes are really sort of reeling after a good start to this season. But one potential bright spot I wanted to address to you, Nathan, is the chance that might be given Adrien Hunou, who scored a great goal the other weekend and has been a player who's been talked about, not really given much of a chance with Rennes. Had a great loan spell with Clermont over the past 2 seasons. Could this be the season for him to really kick on, especially given Gourcuff's injury history?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think he did well. It was against Marseille where he scores the headers, isn't it? And so, yeah, he did well in that one. But Rennes themselves have been reeling a little bit, and they need to find a little bit of a spark. And he added a little bit in that one. And like you say, with Gourcuff's injury history, you need someone that can fill that hole. And there's been plenty of talk about Hunou in the last couple of years. He's reaching that age of where you're on that fence of saying, well, it's time to really put up or shut up, in all honesty. You know, when you get to the 22, 23, he'll be 23 in January. You need to start proving your worth at a club. And I thought he did well when he came on in that one. The game against Dijon, they should really count as a write-off almost in a way, because they were not very good at all. And Dijon really put them to the sword at times. And it exposed some of their where they lacked in defence and where maybe some of their previous games have sort of hidden their frailties there. But it's a strange one. He impressed at Clermont, Hunou, but has he got the quality to really bring down Ligue 1 sides against a team like Guingamp, who have been pretty good defensively? Yes, they lost 1-0 at Bastia at the weekend, but they've not conceded too many goals really this season. They conceded 2 against Monaco, 1 against Marseille. They've kept a couple of clean sheets. It's tough to say. I can't see Rennes at this moment in time with Gourcuff still sort of experimenting with how their midfield set up, how they're set up attacking. I don't think they've got enough to beat a Guingamp side that are still, while they've not had the success that they had in the first couple of games, they're still a decent side. They've still got interesting attacking players, as long as they don't get anyone sent off in silly circumstances like they did at the weekend, they've got a really interesting side of Blas and Marcus Coco's had a really good start to the season. Mustafa Diallo. It's a tricky one. I'd like to see Huno start because they do need more attacking options. They do need to really find out what this Rennes team is without Dembele really carrying the load. Whether they'll do that against Guingamp is another question entirely.
Guingamp also, of course, missing the left back Marsal, who's been really impressive to start the season. So, with those misses in mind, what do you see for tomorrow's match, Nathan, in terms of a score?
I don't think it'll be anything outlandish. I think it's probably gonna. I think Gourcuff will try and tighten things a little bit more for Rennes. I think that eventually Guingamp might nick one at the end. I think it'll be a 1-0 Guingamp.
All right. And Peter, for yourself?
Well, I was going to go 1-0 Guingamp because I'll go 2-0 Guingamp.
All right. And I'll go for a 1-1 draw. Always a fiery event during these Breton derbies. Coming on now to you, Peter, we're going to talk about our relegation 6-pointer, if we can have such a thing in Matchday 7. And that's Lille hosting Nancy. So I guess the question for you would be, is this a must-win for Lille? This team's too talented to be bottom. I think we can all agree on that, given the caliber of players they have. Can a good result and then the international break be enough to right the ship for Antonetti?
I think so, yeah. They very quickly need to obviously turn things around. Angers have shown that can happen very, very quickly in this league. But it's a game that, especially against the team in 19th place, just above them, that they really, really do have to win. The problem with Lille this season, I think, is that just too many of their top players have just not turned up. Eric Botek, I rated him very highly at the beginning of the season, but he's really struggling to, give me any reason to, wish for him to stay in the team. He's just been so poor. I don't know if it's something to do with the system that they're playing, or whether, because I think they lined up 4-2-3-1 against Saint-Etienne, but there's just something not right at Lille at the moment. And I really don't think that offering Antonetti a large contract extension, which I think caught a lot of people by surprise, has helped in any way turn that around. If they lose this game to Nancy, which certainly could happen because this is Lille, I think Antonetti could honestly be in trouble. I know he signed that extension, but I honestly think it could be such an embarrassment of them potentially 3 points adrift at the bottom of the league. They've got -7 goal difference at the moment. It's not a good time to be a Le Doge fan.
All right. So with that in mind, do you have an optimistic prediction for those fans, or one that's a little bit more pessimistic, perhaps?
I'm actually going to go 1-0 Nancy.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not feeling too good about it, and I have got to be honest. Since the Kabbalah games at the beginning of the season, when they're in the Europa League for the short stint, I've not felt good about Lille at all.
All right, I'm going to go with a scoreless draw. I don't think either of these teams have shown all that much going forward this season, by and large. Nathan, for yourself?
Oh, God. I think I will go 1-1.
All right.
It's a difficult one, that one.
This doesn't look to be one of the most exciting fixtures of the weekend, I'll admit that. But I did want to take a look at, given that Lille has such a brilliant end to the season and started so poorly, just trying to get a little bit more. We've talked about this team tactically and how they're getting that wrong. They did give an impressive debut to the youngster Bissouma the other day. Perhaps he could be sort of a spark they need, much as Ronnie Lopez was a spark for them 2 years ago. And we've seen other similar young players really turn teams' fortunes around in the recent past. Dembele for Rennes last season being another example. But Nathan, I want to continue with you. We're going to talk about a team that has similarly been lacking a spark and has perhaps a taller order to deal with. Tall being the operative word, given the height of Toulouse's defenders, Julien and Diop. And that's Caen. Caen have really been poor, but Toulouse are battling some absences. Captain Steve Yago is missing, and Martin Braithwaite continues to be an absentee with a thigh injury. Is this another chance for Toulouse to continue to climb the table, or do Caen have a chance here?
I think it's another chance for Toulouse. I mean, in the last couple of games especially, Caen, the last four, the 2-0 loss to Rennes, 6-0 loss to Paris Saint-Germain, which you can kind of throw off because it's PSG. Angers beat them 2-1, and they drew 0-0 at the weekend. They weren't great against Bordeaux. They didn't really create much. Vicout probably saved them a couple of times, really, to stop them from losing again. But there just seems to be no spark up front, really, at times. And while we've seen Santini occasionally, we've seen Rodelan getting... I think Rodelan's still been pretty decent this season, although he's not scored up as many as he has. He's still got 2 assists, so that's decent. But they just lack a little bit of a spark. We mentioned the other week that Caramo is maybe the occasional spark, and he's grabbed a goal since we last spoke about Caen. But it's just that midfield area. It's just they're not quite getting the same out of Julien Ferret as they were. Their defense isn't quite as solid as it probably was. They look a little bit more suspect in a more competitive Liga, emphasised by Toulouse's rise to third place, which is crazy to think from last season. They were excellent against Paris Saint-Germain. You've already mentioned their 2 giant centre-backs. They've been excellent. I think Alban Lafont has been super duper. It's still, if you haven't seen that save from the weekend where he saves it with his legs, go find that save, because it's not accidental that he's moved his leg there to save that. It's an absolutely terrific save. It's a top-class save. They've got better in midfield. Your favourite man of the moment, Jimmy Dermaz, has scored twice already. He looks very good and creative and adds a little bit that spot that Caen are missing. Martin Braithwaite stepped into that role as captain and main goal scorer very well. Toivonen even grabbed 2 goals in the midweek and crazy goals, as we mentioned last week, that Leo gave away. But they just look a little bit more comfortable in their skin. They look happy under Pascal Duprat. They just look a better side than they were last season and more confident. And Caen aren't really strong enough to stop that train from coming off the tracks yet. There's that game against Monaco after the international break that might be a bit more tougher, but I think Toulouse will ride off into the sunset before them.
All right, it's ironic too to think that Dominic Arribagé had given so many of these youngsters their chance, and now he's not around to reap the results. I'm going to go with a 1-0 win for Toulouse here. Nathan, what's your prediction?
Another 2-0 win, I think. I think probably a double from Martin Braithwaite.
All right. And Peter?
I'm going to go 2-2. I'm sort of hoping that this is going to be the one of the more exciting games this weekend.
All right. Maybe we can see Caen back to the form they showed at least once this season against Lorient, scoring a bunch of goals. But to conclude now, we're going to come on to the Rhone Derby. That's for those who are neophytes to Ligue 1, that's Lyon and Saint-Etienne, one of the most bitter rivalries in the division. It's sort of being seen as a class rivalry as well, Lyon being the more moneyed of the 2 cities and Saint-Etienne being the more working class. But Nathan, Lyon really need a win after playing so poorly in the league of late. Is this a good time to play Saint-Etienne, given injuries that Lever have faced? Or are their own injuries too much to cope with? We should add here that Mapuyanga and B was also missing through suspension.
Hooray! That's probably a
the worst thing, right? Yeah.
That's more of a blessing in disguise, isn't it? Because he's been awful. It's a good. Is there a good time to play Saint-Etienne? I mean, we mentioned the other week that when Lorient played. Sorry, it wasn't Lorient. It was not when they played Saint-Etienne with so many players injured that. It's a great time for them to play them, and that didn't happen. The great thing this time is the midweek game will take a toll on Saint-Etienne, I think, against Anderlecht. And yes, they came out with a draw and a good draw, and they'll be happy about that. But they don't have the squad depth at the moment to deal with that. And playing, I know again, Lyon played in midweek and have their own injury problems, but those extra couple of days rest will really come into play when you're playing thin squads. Yes, Lyon really need the win here, more than probably Saint-Etienne do. They need to jump back on the horse. 3 defeats already is not good enough in the league. They really need to especially if should PSG slip up again or others around them, so they can start building that form and those results. They need a win here. I think Fekir is slowly coming back into the form that we saw spectacularly a couple of seasons ago. He looks sharper. It looks like that knee, the decision to do that explorative knee surgery to fix whatever was still mulling around there, seemed to give him that little, I don't know if you've seen it as well, Eric, that little edge, that little close ball control that we really love from him seems to be a little bit more back. He seems a little bit more sharper. But yeah, it's a difficult one for both teams with their injuries, but with only a couple of days rest for a couple of days more rest for Lyon, it's going to be a huge advantage in this one, I think.
No, I would fully agree, and I do think that Fekir's best two performances have been the two most recent matches. He, despite not getting a result against Sevilla, he really was quite a spark. But another attacking player who has been quite a spark, I think, was Mathieu Valbuena. It was not overwhelming against Sevilla, but I thought he had a pretty decent match against Lorient, playing behind a striker. Peter, is it time for him to get the start against Les Verts?
I think so, yeah. I think he obviously was impressive in the previous game. And I think that number 10 position suits him a lot better than being pushed out wide, to be honest with you. I don't think he's quite got the pace to really trouble fullbacks, especially not these days when fullbacks are so much quicker and have so much more stamina, because obviously they're facing such wings with such pace. There's an excellent player in there somewhere in Valbuena. He showed that obviously many years ago. Didn't have a great time in Russia, but I really do think that Lyon could be a very good club for him in the way that they set up and the way that they're showing that they can adapt to different systems. And personally, I'd like to see him do well. He's always a player I've been quite a fan of. A question for you, Eric, if you don't mind. With Lyon sitting in 9th place at the moment, this is not good enough, especially considering PSG's slip-ups in the league, with obviously teams like Nice, Monaco, and Toulouse really kind of taking advantage of that. If Lyon are to lose this game, could Bruno Genesio's job be at risk?
No, I don't think so. I think the mitigating circumstances at play here, given the injuries that the club have had, the suspension of Gonalon, the injury to Fekir, the injury to Lacazette, the injury to Raphael, even the injury to Jallet, who had been playing some of these matches in the recent weeks with the fixture congestion. These are all, I think, really conspiring against the team to make things very difficult. And we saw the fact that Genesio was forced to hand a debut to Jordi Gaspar on Tuesday, who did not terribly poorly, but just wasn't afforded really enough protection at right wing back. Did concede a penalty, which Vieto missed against Sevilla. I think it's more circumstantial. Lyon have weathered poor starts in the past. I think in 2011-12, they started with only 1 win in 7 matches to start the season. Last year, they were pretty poor to start, if I recall correctly, before really kicking things on once Fournier was dismissed in favor of Genesio. So I don't think that his job should be at risk. I think that, given the fact that he's had to play a radically different system and make do without his captain, without his leading scorer, without his most creative player. I mean, I think one can make the fair argument that missing 3 of your best 4 players for the majority of the season to date it needs to be taken into consideration when a manager's job is assessed. But coming on to that, I wanted to ask each of you a question, perhaps about the 3-5-2 that Lyon have been using. It does get the best out of the likes of Ribas and Raphael on the wings, but now that Raphael is injured, you've got the option of Olivier Cayman or Jordi Gaspar playing on the right. With that question in mind, Nathan, I'll ask this to you first. Should the system be changed to offer that right right wing back a little bit more protection?
It's a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've already mentioned with Yang and Biwa's suspension that you're already playing with the centre backs already, and that's where the main issue really was, to play the three centre backs and then using the 5-2. It does get the advantages of Raphael and Ribas, which you've mentioned. Surprise, surprise, Raphael's injured, so it's up to playing a young player. And you're right. Does playing that 3-5-2 give them enough protection? I don't know. I think it's probably easier for a young player under pressure to play as a right wing back rather than playing as a right back where he might get caught out a little bit or more often. But it's completely depending on where Genesio sees this game going. We mentioned this also probably gets this the best out of the attacking players that they have available to them without Lacazette fit. But whether it's the best for Valbuena in the side if he starts, it's a tough one, isn't it? I really like how the 3-5-2 works with the players they have. Yes, it might be a bit worrying to give a young player a complete freedom on that right wing, but you can try and give him as much support as you can, but sometimes you have to throw them in the deep end a little bit. I would just go with what's working. If he feels this is working enough and this is the formation he wants to go forward with, even when Lacazette returns, then go with it. Otherwise, you're risking reverting and switching and then confusing players and not allowing them to settle in the system is a worry that because they haven't played it for long enough, not allowing others to settle in that system either could be detrimental to the rest of the season if they did go forward with it.
And Peter, I'll come on to you for a final question. That being said, we've seen this 3-5-2. We've seen the two be a number of different personnel, but one juncture which they were particularly effective was in Corentin Tolisso playing as that second striker, or sort of in a playmaking role. Is that a role that he should take up again at the weekend, given how successfully he played?
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, I think he's one of the brightest players in that Lyon side, and I certainly would be more tempted to try and accommodate him than to accommodate Valbuena. As much as I've previously said, I do like Valbuena. I think he's a really, really promising player. Lyon have done a fantastic job of keeping hold of him, and I would be certainly looking to try and get the most out of him in that position, especially as he's looked so good in recent weeks. Just to quickly add as well on the previous question about the formation, I personally would look at possibly moving to a formation like 4-3-3 or something like that, where you can have two wingers that can track back and cover your fullbacks, because you could see it really could get very, very negative if that poor one of those young right backs make a mistake and it costs them the game, especially in a rivalry such as this. But I think we can all probably agree that this is going to be the game of the weekend.
Well, let's certainly hope so. It's 2 3-0s last year, one to each side, so certainly a fixture not shy of goals last season. So prediction-wise, Nathan, I'll come to you first.
2-0 to Lyon. I think the thing I mentioned earlier about Saint-Etienne's rest is just going to be too much for them to overcome.
All right. And Peter?
I'm going to go 2-1 to Lyon.
Okay. And I'm going to go with a 1-1 draw. Despite my Lyon fandom, I just think that Lyon are still getting this right, and the right back position does worry me still a little bit. I think that Cayman is not really a right back. Gaspar is, but I think is really too raw at this point in time. Well, thank you for tuning in. Do follow us at GFFN and also at GFFN Match Zone for up-to-date coverage of all the matches. And join us on Monday for the main show hosted by Nathan. Thank you for listening. And for Peter Bowler and Nathan Staples, I've been Eric Devin. Thank you and have a pleasant rest of your evening.